Hi everyone. This video is a book review about a book that I read 2 months ago and unfortunately was not able to add to my September 11th book review video series. And the title of this book is We're Not Leaving. 9/11 responders tell their stories of courage, sacrifice, and renewal. And it is written or compiled by Benjamin J. Luft, MD, a medical doctor. I don't recall how I found out about this book. I know I ended up buying it on Thrift Books. I may have come across it when I was looking up stories in relation to people who suffered from physical ailments as a result of being in close proximity to ground zero. And perhaps somewhere along the line, I came across this book. But this book is basically a compilation of the stories of first responders. Some of them were at the site, some of them were not at the site, some of them were actually out of town and came to ground zero to help with the pile. It was very intense. Some of the stories were very, very depressing. I don't know if all of the people that told their stories are still alive, but each of their stories matters. So before I get into all of these stories, let me read to you a little bit about Dr. Benjamin Luft. And this is a close-up photo of him. I don't know if you can see it. It's from Stony Brook University. It's him. Or an old picture. He is the director and principal investigator of Stony Brook WTC Wellness Program. So I guess it's World Trade Center Wellness Program. Infectious disease and Renaissance School of Medicine. So he's an expert in infectious diseases, Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, and World Trade Center exposure-related illnesses. It says, Benjamin J. Luft, MD, is an internationally recognized expert in the treatment of Lyme disease and AIDS-related conditions, and was named the Edmund D. Pellegrino Professor of Medicine in 1987. Dr. Luft served as chairman of the Department of Medicine from 1994 to 2006, and is now director and principal investigator of the Stony Brook World Trade Center Wellness Program. A researcher and educator with diverse interests and achievements, Dr. Luft is a passionate spokesperson who seeks to impart a reverence for humanity and a commitment to ethics in the practice of medicine. And he's a fellowship, or he had a fellowship at Stanford University Hospital. His residency was at the Veterans Administration Medical Center and New York University, and he has a MD from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And there's also some articles on Stony Brook's page, I guess related to him and his September 11th work. I'm clicking on the World Trade Center borne illness. But yeah, I wish there were more books that focused on the stories of those who were exposed to the contaminants of Ground Zero. But this is all I have for now. This book was written in 2000 or published in 2011, so basically 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago that this book is written. As I stated earlier, some of the people may be alive and some of them may not be alive. There were maybe one or two people in this book who died either before the book was published or not long after the book was published. It was published by Greenpoint Press. It also contains some of the photographs from the site. like this photograph where they're carrying a firefighter. It says, "Without heroes, we are all plain people and don't know how far we can go," by Bernard Malamud, 1914 to 1986. Responders carry the recovered body of a police officer or fireman in a Stokes basket draped with an American flag, and the photo is by Steve Spack. Very, very, very sad. My interest in hearing more about first responders came, I think it started with the book I read one year for my September 11th anniversary book review video series. When I was reading September 11th or 9/11 in oral history, but I really wanted to learn more about the first responders in particular when I did a book review this year on people, most of the people that were there. It was a photography book. I can't remember the name from the top of my head, but I have a video on it in one of my playlists. This book is divided into 5 parts. So part 1 is called Caught in the Collapse. So essentially, as the terrorist attack was happening. The second part is Looking for Survivors. This is basically after the towers have fallen. Part 3 is Recovery, 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 which is almost like an extended version of Looking for Survivors, but like way more depressing. Part 4 is The Responders Need Help, which essentially talks about the mental and physical consequences that the first responders had from working at Ground Zero. And finally, Renewal, which talks about, resolutions, results, and going forward with our lives. So I'm going to kind of jump through some of the stories and show you some pictures before I do. And this one, helping people. Reading this book really gave me more information about certain things I didn't come across in other books. The sounds of Ground Zero, the smells, the absolute danger. Now, one thing that you'll notice if you read this book, they don't call it, most people in this book do not call it Ground Zero. They call it the pile because it was just a pile of stuff. It's just bodies, metal, glass, twisted, burning pile. The pile. Another thing I did not know until I read this book is how long the fires were burning. The fire beneath the pile was burning for at least almost 100 days, maybe 99 to 100 days. There was still a fire burning, and they had to be very careful where they would step because you could fall through and die. You could get seriously injured or something. Very, very sad. It says, Chapter 1, We're Not Leaving. Says Carol worked for the Transit Division of the New York City Police Department. Assigned to a unit covering the World Trade Center, she was one of the first officers on the scene. Standing in the lobby doorway trying to get people out, she was blown violently from the building as the tower collapsed, blinded, choking, and seriously injured. Carol continued pulling people from the rubble and looking for survivors. Most people she found were dead. Portuguese writer Fernando Pessoa wrote that to express something is to take away its terror. But Pessoa didn't witness Nagasaki, the Holocaust, or September 11th. Otherwise, he may well have agreed with Theodore Adorno that to write a poem after Auschwitz is barbaric. Mass atrocity overwhelms language's capacity to express the atrocity's magnitude and fierce evil. Carol and other responders often struggle to find words darkly and deeply rich enough to suggest the horrific. The same adjectives and comparisons recur: amazing, unbelievable, surreal, shocking, like in a movie, but the words seem anemic. One of the most piercing frustrations of people touched by violent mass atrocity is not being able to adequately relate it to others. They often feel trapped inside their heads in unbearable memories. I think that was a very good introduction. Rereading it again after reading this book, even though it's been about 2 months since I've completed this book. That is one thing I noticed in some of the first accounts. Some of them were in a state of shock. Some of them didn't know what was going on. Others knew automatically that it was a terrorist attack. I feel their training, most of them, their training where a lot of them saved their lives, because the average person isn't trained like a firefighter. The average person isn't trained like a first responder medical student or a doctor or a police officer, where you have to think clearly in the midst of chaos. The average person does not do that unless, they've reached something from inside of themselves to go beyond their fear. But yeah. So Carol is saying that they came out of the subway system and people were frantic. She speaks about a lot of debris coming down. As I ran towards the World Trade Center, people were pointing, screaming, and shouting, "That way, that way." As I came up on the buildings, I saw Tower 1. I saw the rear end of a plane sticking out, halfway in, halfway out. But I could only see the rear of that plane in the building, and a lot of blood and debris. People were frantic. People were panicking, not knowing what to do. I think it's neat that she mentions that there were a plane, because there are like various accounts where some people say there was no plane and others say there was a plane. I've read some accounts where people didn't see a plane, and I've read other accounts where they did see a plane with their physical eyes, or they saw parts of a plane on the ground. Just something that really stood out to me. And also the lack of understanding some of the everyday people had in regards to what these first responders and other people had gone through. Like, they tried their best. Like, they would donate their time, they would donate food. There's a lot of details about that in this book, about people coming from out of town to help, like giving them socks, giving them boots, like playing them music, all sorts of things. But some people just couldn't get over the tragedy because it was so traumatic. It was replayed in their heads. Some of them had nervous breakdowns. Some of them couldn't keep their marriages together because of the tragedy of 9/11. She says, I called for assistance on the radio and confirmed that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, calling for other officers to respond for assistance, for supervisors, and immediately went to Tower 2, which we were closer to. People were still coming in and out of the building. She says, because the plane was so forward into the building, it did not look like it was a big jet plane. When I looked up, I saw the rear of the plane. A lot of people never even saw it sticking out, because once the jet fuel dripped into the building, there was an explosion and you no longer saw the plane. But when I initially got there, I saw the back of the plane sticking out of the building. That's interesting, because I guess I just assumed that it just disintegrated. That's what I had assumed, but this is the first account I've read of somebody seeing in the actual plane. Like, maybe it was seconds later that it exploded. I don't know. So there were about 10 police officers working the area with me. Big, burly guy, FBI shield around his neck, came up to us and said, "You're not a coward. If you want to leave, there are more planes coming. We're under attack. You're going to die if you stay here." And this came from an FBI agent. And I remember looking up at him and saying, "You're kidding me, right?" He said, "We're under attack. It's terrorism." He knew more than I knew. The cops that I was working with, we were like, "We're just going to continue. We're making a choice. We're not leaving. That's our job." So now you've got 2 planes hit the tower. You're just in this smoke-filled, debris-filled area where there's jumpers. I saw my first jumper. I had no idea what it was. When somebody just jumps and they're on the ground 20 feet from you, it's just an awful sight. It's like a tomato. You can't. It's unrecognizable. What do? You hear these noises and these crashes and you don't know what they are, but they were people jumping. I saw people actually hanging off the side of the building, as people saw later on in the films, coming out of the buildings because of all of the smoke. That was hard to see. To see those people up there and not be able to do anything for them. Sometimes when I'm researching, like, because I'm going to do my September 11th video series every year, but there's really not that many videos of the jumpers. I did find one video on YouTube that showed like the jumpers jumping, but most of them you can't see. Maybe there's a handful, but a lot of it has been censored. But there was one documentary with the French brothers where you heard crashing. It was like the bodies coming down was like glass just smashing, and or like hail, like when hail hits your car and you have boom, 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 like that. It was very disturbing. I think personally, for some people, the jumpers were the worst part because you're watching somebody before your very eyes die in front of you. Like all of your fears are compiled into one person that you don't even know. You want to save them, but you can't save them. You feel their fear, you feel their horror, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, body parts, dust, debris. People that were coming out there were injured, burn victims. I mean, a guy came out. His shoulder was like totally dislocated and backwards. The side of his face was burnt off and his ear was missing. You can't train to see that. I'm sure even a doctor would take a second look at something like that. So they're continuing to evacuate people. She's talking about there's army people and National Guardsmen. Then she says, Tower 2 collapsed first. I was actually inside the building near the escalators when the tower collapsed. When the building imploded down, it blew me out of the building, and I was able to hold on to the doorway with my left arm. People blew by me and under me and through me. Only with one arm did I hold on. If you ever saw a cartoon with somebody midair holding on for their life, I was actually holding on for my life, not knowing what was happening, just knowing that there were explosions and that there were people coming past me, and there was utter terror. I was able to bring my other hand over because I was in shape. I worked out. I lifted weights 4 times a week, and that's the only thing that really saved my life, was being strong. I was able to pull myself down and heard somebody to the right of me yelling at me, grab my hand, grab my hand." And I tried to feel for somebody because I couldn't see anything. You couldn't breathe. I pulled, and this person pulled me back. I pulled myself over them. We didn't know what was happening because you couldn't see. It was totally dark, and there was total silence. I was lying under all the debris with a guy. I had no idea he was a police officer or who he was. His name is Richie. He worked for Manhattan Traffic at the time. I found this out afterwards. So they're just, I kept hearing, Holy Mary, Mother of God, and somebody just kept praying. It was a man's voice. They just kept saying it, and it got louder and louder. Later on, I asked Richie, did you ever see anybody? And he said no. Did you hear that man? And he said yes. It was like a voice we were walking to. It was really eerie because my dad had passed away. I think it was my dad. So that was very difficult. I feel like there's so much ancestral energy over stagnant chi or something over at the pile at ground zero. I feel that people doing the reading of the names and ringing the bells and people gathering to pay homage to the people that died is really helping their souls heal. Like some people, they'll be like, oh, you go here, you go there. But other people believe that when you die in a tragic way, sometimes your soul is literally stuck in that trauma and it can't move forward. And I feel that doing the reading of the names and all of that and praying for them and pouring the water and rubbing their names and just keeping their memory alive is helping their souls move on to the next life. Oh, my goodness. But what ended up happening, when they arrived to the hospital, they noticed a triage area with nurses and doctors waiting for the arrival of victims. Carol realizes that nobody's coming. She says, I didn't work the pile. I didn't do recovery work. I blew out my rotator cuff. I had shoulder surgery. I had both my knees reconstructed, back damage, lung damage, and corneal abrasions. My physical injuries kept me from working the pile. They put me on light duty, answering phones and doing what I could do to help. While I awaited having my 3 surgeries, I was in vicinity because I worked at Canal Street, so I was in the air-contaminated zone. What's also interesting about this book is that at the end of every chapter, people will give their thoughts. Some people will be like, this country is still great, I believe in it. And some people will express disillusionment. Like they're like, I'm disillusioned. I don't believe in this anymore. I love how they capture the array of feelings. Some people became more patriotic. Some people became disillusioned. Some retired from the work completely. And all of their feelings are valid. She says, it really pisses me off that the communication system was horrible. You're really on 4 or 5 different frequencies because transit has their own line, NYPD had their own line, housing had their own line, the fire department, EMS had their own line, the Port Authority too. Only supervisors could communicate with those people, so we don't know what's going on. I think that the communication problem is a very big thing that should be worked on. The other thing I would change is that you don't set up a triage center at the base of a building that's on fire, which makes obviously a lot of sense because that's not the first time I've read about that where people got killed helping people right outside of the area. I don't think I would be even near that building after seeing a plane go through it. Like, I would be nowhere near. I'd be afraid like the whole building would just, well, it fell, but I would have been afraid it would have just spontaneously exploded. Let's hope we've learned that because I have footage of people that are actually dead that were at the foot of the building being triaged. That really pisses me off because those people should not have been there. Don't ever take your life for granted. Live each day to its fullest. Yes, we're in a free country, but I do believe in more screening at the airports, more screening at the bus terminals, more screening at the buildings. Yeah, especially the bus terminals. Like, they need to screen at the bus terminals and the train stations like they do at the airport. I just don't feel there's enough security at the bus line. Like, you didn't even screen my bag. You didn't look through what was in my bag or anything. You didn't even check me to see if I had a weapon. And this is the Greyhound and Amtrak. They never check to see if I have anything on me. There's not even a metal detector. At least where I'm at, there was no metal detector. Like, anybody could come on there, and that's literally one of my greatest concerns. I think I might write to them about that, because you got anybody and everybody coming on there. Whatever. I do believe it's going to happen again. I think the terrorists are out there. We've recently put a stop to another terrorist attack. Our subway system is totally vulnerable. People don't want to put the money out to make it not vulnerable. We should be going through every subway station and checking luggage. Literally, for real, that is what we should be doing now. Because in my city, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on the train. Actually, there's been 2 people killed on the train in the past year and a half. Like, one guy got shot. Then there's a metro person that got shot, like security guard that got shot. I had a man on the train try to trap me in my bus or my train seat and pull down his pants in broad daylight. Fights, arguments, smoking everything. Like, security on the train is a joke unless they have the state troopers there. Complacency opens you up to vulnerability. Complacency opens you up to danger. I think I did my best. I had a chance to leave and I chose to stay. I wish more people could have been saved. I definitely have survivor's guilt. I definitely have post-traumatic stress syndrome. I definitely have lung damage. My body hurts all the time, every day. I try not to give into that. I just get up and try to live my life every day to its fullest. There's also talk in here about the dogs that were on the pile. They also suffered from depression because they weren't finding anyone alive or finding nobody. So they had volunteers act like victims so that the dogs could save them and build up their morale again. The dogs. They even had to put little shoes on, or little cloths on their paws because the ground was hot. It was too hot for their paws because there was a fire burning underneath it. Oh my goodness. There's another chapter called Am I Dead? And this is Jack, the director of emergency medical services at New York. His job was all about preparing to move into a disaster site at a moment's notice. So, plans have been in place to execute it all with discipline, speed, meticulous organization, and professionalism. However, airliners are not supposed to hit towering Manhattan buildings and explode on impact. And 110-story landmark structures are not supposed to collapse. What Jack encountered mocked his sophisticated planning and strategies. People like Jack may escape being consumed by flames, but the experience of having been close to those flames marks them for life. Regardless of what they do or where they go, hell goes with them. So, Jack goes down there. I guess he's in Tower 2. I had 2 people already in the lobby of Tower 2 that had just gotten there earlier. They were communicating their needs as well. Then we all started in unison to walk towards Tower 2, but with the jumpers that were coming out of the building, it was obviously a danger to us. So we actually went out of our way to line ourselves up with the entrance of the building, which had a canopy. You could see when people were hitting the canopy, they were bouncing off and not penetrating it. We were taking a lot of time keeping personal safety in mind. It was at that moment that a Port Authority cop standing at the corner of Tower 2 started screaming, "Run for your lives, it's coming down." I looked up and it looked like the top of the building was just falling over, probably the top 15 stories of the building. What quickly went through my mind was, do we turn around and run back? Or do we run into the lobby for protection? I yelled to the staff and we all ran into the opposite direction of the towers. I was running next to one of my guys, Mike, and there was a female rescuer that was running between the two of us with probably 15 to 20 feet. The debris started getting bigger and bigger. When it first started out, it was small stuff. Then it got bigger and bigger. Then the steel started to land around us, and the piece of the steel came down and actually decapitated the woman that was running in between us. That is so disturbing. He ends with his, "There is no closure to 9/11, unfortunately. You can't get away from it. When you read the paper, when you watch the 5 o'clock news, anytime, you just can't get away from it. It's always going to be that way. Is there total closure? No. But dealing with people who did not recover remains is very difficult for them. Or maybe they've got knocked unconscious and they're in a coma somewhere or have amnesia. I think that without a body, you can play tremendous mind games with yourself. I think that one of the things that bother me about 9/11, it's probably going to happen again. And I think too many people have become very passive about it and don't really have a concept of what it's all about. I'm not bashing the government or any particular party, but I sit there at night with my experience. I sit there at night and look at the Gulf Coast crisis, and what are we doing? We're doing the exact same things we did on 9/11. You had Christy Whitman standing there saying, "The air is fine, don't worry about it." And we've got guys on the Gulf Coast right now that are cleaning up a tremendous oil spill. And not only is oil coming up out of there, there are tons of minerals, gases that are coming out of that well as well. That was what a lot of people were talking about in this book that were angry because they did not have adequate masks. They didn't have adequate equipment to keep out the debris. They were told that the air was fine and breathable. They were told that they could eat. There were descriptions of all of the colors of smoke that they hadn't seen before. Red and purple and green and blue and dust and just dust everywhere. Dust on their feet, dust on their sandwiches. It's cold. Their boots are wet. Like, just very uncomfortable, and they're breathing all of that in. They lied about the contamination, and now people are still suffering from it. People were getting cancers. Now there are stories in here of people that decided to help. They were starting organizations. They were starting peer assistance. Ongoing contamination. This is from one section called Learning Lessons the Hard Way. There were things I wish we had done. I wish we could have done our own monitoring and sampling at Ground Zero. I don't know if most people realize that to this day there has never been an assessment of contamination in Lower Manhattan, never of working workplaces or little residences. The events are in the past, but the impact is still not understood, and it's still not addressed in the way that it should be. Certainly not in terms of health. As a society, we think of emergencies as short-term events. The emergency happens. You have all kinds of relief organizations pouring in, just like the horrible events that are going on in Japan. And after a short period of time, because the news stopped reporting it, it should be done. But the people that were affected continue to be affected. I think that's another thing we need to change in terms of responding to emergencies. Then they have a chapter in here, Father Mike, talking about all of the people coming together, coming to the church. This is a really beautiful story. I think that people preached and talked about what it meant for a long time in churches. We kept making those connections, the bigger connections. How do we think about the world that we live in? How do we think about the people that might have been responsible for this? How do we think about other cultures, the other places? Can we be peacemakers? I noticed that with Ferguson. Like, Ferguson was just, I had never seen anything like that in St. Louis before, and I grew up in Ferguson. That was where I spent my childhood. I didn't think anything was going to happen with Ferguson because there had been so many killings in St. Louis by police officers and nothing had been done. I just assumed that that's what would happen with Ferguson, and it didn't. They made it into an international story, and that is good. It's really the average person that raises awareness, that promotes change in the society. It's what we accept, it's what we don't accept. Complacency stops progress. And I noticed that a lot in these books. Some of the responders were talking about people just didn't care about them anymore. It was like they were just tossed to the side. Or people were taking notice of them even though they've been saving lives before 9/11 happened. I think of all of the people I take advantage of in this city. Like if my house is on fire, I call the fire department and they come and save me. If I'm in the burning building, they're going to come and save me. That's usually what they do. I take advantage of that. I just expect someone to help. And they don't have to help. They don't have to risk their life to save my life, but they do. But nobody takes the time to thank them except maybe at Christmas or like Veterans Day or something. But this book really made me take more notice of the people already in my life who are helping the community without having a tragedy happen to bring them into the spotlight. So I thank them and I acknowledge them, and I'm planned on next year doing more to show my thanks for them. Next year I'm going to be focusing more on gratitude and being more community minded, being more community oriented. A lot of people don't understand what these people go through, like the doctors, the firefighters, the police officers, the teachers, the educators, all of these people that are working on keeping the public safe. They don't think about their stress. They don't think about that they may lose their lives every single day. We just go to work and expect to come home alive. They go to work and hope that they come home alive. And that requires some respect. I respect that. I really respect that. This was a very hard story to read, a book to read, because some of the images were just so overwhelming. I just don't know how somebody didn't lose their mind. A lot of people did lose their mind. Just imagine you're in a place, you're hoping to find someone alive, and they're not alive. You have to monitor every single step so you won't fall into a raging fire that's burning underneath your feet for almost 100 days. You're being exposed to contaminants your dogs are getting depressed, and you're having to put pieces of a building in buckets. That's what they call the bucket brigade, like bucket, pile. Had the iron workers too. They were some people who needed thanks. They helped move a lot of the rubble. One thing I feel like I wish we had all learned from September 11th was we are our only family. Like, we're humans. We have to share this world together. Anytime you enact violence on a human in any way, shape, or form, in the end, you're hurting yourself. Anytime you're hurting the environment, you're hurting yourself as well. It all comes back to you. The energy you send out, the acts that you take, the small actions that can lead to peace or a war. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I would get this book, especially if you're a person thinking about going into any of these fields, whether it be a police officer or firefighter. Just know that it's okay to get resources. It's okay to get therapy. I would recommend, even though I'm not in those fields, to get somebody who is a therapist that you can talk with along your journey as you're in there, to make sure all of your things are in order in case, God forbid, something does happen to you, to make sure you have life insurance, to make sure you have good people around your family, a good support system, somebody to talk to, how to have a healthy marriage, because some of these marriages ended because the spouses couldn't deal with the trauma of 9/11. So thank you everyone for watching, and happy reading to you.